Hi, my name's Dan, and this video is one in a short series of videos that I'm doing about uh, character mechanics, which are common in RPGs. And this particular one, I'm going to talk about the basic character stats. It's part of a much larger suite of videos that I'm doing on game design principles and ideas and etc. Okay, so there's not a huge amount for me to say really on this. I've given a background in the previous video in the series of what these stats are. They're numbers that represent character strengths and weaknesses, and they're often the very fundamental building blocks for all sorts of effects and calculations in RPGs. They're not just limited to RPGs. There's so many games now that use this sort of idea that that characters have some kind of numerical measure for the different characteristics. Another way of thinking of them is that they're numbers that drive gameplay. When you start having calculations in your gameplay, particularly in your combat, then your stats might be heavily involved there. Okay, I want to make a distinction between the concept of basic stats, which are stats that are effectively this is a number, it's not derived from anywhere other than it being this number, and derived stats, which are usually more directly related to the gameplay in some ways, um, but then they may be derived from the basic stats or from other things, and there may be changes to them enhanced by equipment, weapons, etc. So an example for this is that your inventory might have a carry weight limit, which is a maximum amount of stuff that you can carry, and that's a number that's been presented somewhere in the game system. And that number itself may be dependent on the strength of the character. And it's highly likely that each of your basic stats is used in more than one way um, in order to derive some kind of aspects and limits in gameplay. Okay. Um, Not much more to say except I'm just going to have a look at a few examples of stat sets, which will give you kind of a basic understanding of what these stats are and how they're used. If you didn't know, well, you probably do if you're a game player. So, in which case, why are you watching this and skip forwards to the one that's got design thoughts in it? Anyway, here's stats from Warface, and this is not your kind of very well-known game in some ways, but also it's here because it's such a classic set of stats here. So there are 6 stats in this game: strength, dexterity, intellect, stamina, luck, and charisma. And it's fairly easy to understand what these things are and what they might be driving. So strength is probably something to do with how strong the character is and might affect damage in some cases. I'm trying to think what weapons they use in this game. Dexterity is the kind of the other side of that. So strength in, let's talk about these in more abstract terms. So strength in fantasy games where you've got melee weapons, usually that has an impact on the damage that you'll do with things like swords, maces, axes, etc. Dexterity is usually linked into things like the ability to dodge, but also tends to be used for ranged attack, bows and guns and things like that, as a determiner that will affect the amount of damage that's done. Intellect can affect all sorts of things. In fantasy games with magic, intellect is often tied into to the magic system. So higher intellect gives you higher abilities at magic. Stamina, there's all sorts of things that can be used for, and there's different games call these different things. So this is there can be kind of a defense number. It can be affect how many hit points that you've got. Luck is one that can have far-reaching effects, especially if you say that luck just basically affects all your random number generation. There's a chance that things might go better in your favour. And charisma tends to be about interactions with NPCs or with other players, depending on the situation that you've got. And high charisma players are obviously the ones that are, sorry, characters are the ones that are attractive and or likable, and tend to be able to get their own way in situations. Here's another set from one of the Final Fantasy games, 14, I think. Here we've got a very similar set in some ways. So we've got strength, good old favourite, strength comes back. Vitality, which is possibly similar in some ways to the stamina from the previous one, but it may mean something slightly different. It's usually to do with life force, that word. Dexterity, once again. Coordination is sometimes a word that's used for a similar kind of stat. Intelligence is back. Mind. So I can't remember from playing this game. I've just searched for some pictures to put up with some stat sets. So I'm guessing what mind might be about, but I'm thinking it's similar to charisma in some ways, in that it's um, influencing people, but it's probably more based on a strength of will rather than an attractiveness or a friendliness or whatever you want to think charisma is. And piety is obviously some kind of measure that's related to a religious system in here, and be interesting to see what that affects in the gameplay. And the final one I'm going to look at, this is a classic Dungeons and Dragons. This is a picture from 5th edition. And this system of games had a huge influence, even to the extent you might notice that the order of these is very similar in the three that I've shown. Strength has come at the start. And this, I'm pretty sure, is driven by the tradition that has come through from the D&D games and other role-playing games that use these similarly. So once again, here we've got strength, we've got dexterity, we've got constitution, which is like the stamina kind of measure. We've got intelligence again, we've got wisdom. So this system separates the idea of book smarts from the idea of world smarts and worldly wiseness. And finally, we've got charisma again here. Now, charisma is probably comes more into play in a pen and paper role-playing game, because you're doing more in the way of actual role play as well as your rule play. The video games that are based on these systems usually have less in terms of opportunities to go in your own direction and decide what you want to do for yourself, and so have less in the realm of the role play aspects. My experience, which is somewhat limited with these systems, is that the charisma stat is a bit of a curse at times. It's fairly easy to play low charisma characters. It's easy to pretend to be obnoxious or unlikable. There's all sorts of fun and interesting ways to do that. But playing a character with high charisma is very difficult, and it relies on the other players around you remembering that your charisma is meant to be high and responding in an appropriate way, because it is about how other characters respond to you. Anyway, that's a bit of a rundown of some typical stat sets, and I thought some stuff about the role that they play in role-playing games. Of course, in your games and your systems that you're creating, you might want to go in a completely different direction, and all sorts of games have done so. But it's definitely remarkable that those three sets of stats, which are from three very different games in some ways, were very similar. And there are good reasons for this. That these stat sets often describe very usable basic stats that have got accepted ways that they affect the gameplay, and these are these things have become accepted, and players do like variety and change, but players also like familiarity. So feel free to mess with it, but be careful when you're messing with it and understand what you're doing. Anyway, that's it from me for now.